Hi. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the PPP timing decision that you have. So in today's agenda, we're going to do a couple of scenario analysis in terms of the timing of claiming those PPP loans. I know we're feeling some time pressure given the dollars that are moving through in terms of the original allocation to the PPP. And we got to talk about this with an acknowledgement of what we don't have clarity on. We don't know when the practice is going to reopen. We don't know if PPP will receive additional funding, and we don't know the forgiveness application nor the calculation. So that PPP receiving additional funding, it has been the case that Washington continues to talk about funding it up. Last Friday there was a bill to introduce an additional $200 billion of funding. However, that did not pass. Now, they're on recess, and it's going to be some time until we get finalization on that. While we're saying that, I have seen reports that about $200 billion out of the $350 billion has been allocated. That still leaves $150 billion, but I know a lot of our clients and a lot of you out there are receiving correspondence from your banker that this is something you need to move on. And so I want to just make sure we have good insight in terms of what are some of the scenarios in terms of wait and see versus move now. So in this short video, we're going to explore two practices. In each one of those two practices, we're going to put through 4 scenarios. So the first practice, we're going to say it's a mid-sized practice. We have 1 doctor, capped at that $100,000. We have 3 hygienists, all making $45,000. We got 4 assistants or floaters or non-hygiene but clinical, making about $30,000. And we've got 1 front office and support, about $25,000. So that does not fit everybody's practice, but wanted to have a mid-sized practice and wanted to look at a small practice. In both of these practices and in all of these scenarios, we're going to take up a hypothetical that we're kicking back up again on June 1st. My hope is we're back in practicing before then, but I figured that might give us a good ability to see what's the benefit in waiting, what's the cost possibly of waiting, what's the benefit of moving now, what might we be leaving on the table if we move now. And in all of these scenarios, we're assuming that the staff and the doctor are currently taking that expanded unemployment from the CARES Act. So here we've got the practice, the smaller practice. 1 doctor, 1 hygienist, 1 assistant, 1 floater. Still targeting June 1st, and still assuming everybody's currently collecting expanded unemployment. So now we're in option 1, and we got a large wall of numbers here, and I don't want you to necessarily be looking at each one of these numbers, but what I want you to kind of acknowledge or take a look at is here on April 20th, we're assuming we are applied for the PPP, it is in process, and that on April 27th, that week then, we're able to start. And in this option 1, we broke out the doctor moves back onto payroll, so he is building up that payroll cost, and then 4 weeks later, for the second 4-week period of PPP loan forgiveness, that's where we bring the staff off of unemployment and back into the practice. So receive PPP funds starting April 27th, doctor moves to payroll immediately, staff stays on unemployment for the first 4 weeks, and the full amount of those PPP dollars under this scenario did not qualify for that 75% payroll cost restriction. Wanted to have a model that showed that. Now there are a couple of different options we have to kind of kick up that payroll cost if we see that coming, which a lot of us have discussed, but wanted to run a scenario where we don't enact any of those because we don't have clarity on that loan forgiveness process yet. Option 2, April 20th, we're getting our paperwork in order, we're working with our banker. Starting on April 27th, we bring our staff back. We then, again, assuming that June 1st start date, so we've got a little bit of overlap in terms of our PPP dollars. This is different from option 1 because we took staff and we moved them off of unemployment at the same time that we moved the doctor off of unemployment. In this case, the amount well qualifies for that 75% payroll rule. PPP forgiveness window ends June 15th in both of these scenarios. In option 3, we took an extreme view of it. Let's say that we decided to wait until we were closer to that June 1st start date. And let's say that they did not fund up PPP, or that we chose not to put in a loan application. I'm having that conversations with clients as well. So the only benefit that we're utilizing from the CARES Act is that expanded unemployment. Then in option 4, the best of all scenarios work. We stay on unemployment while we are planning to open on June 1st. On May 25th, we're getting everything in order. June 21st starts the clock. On our 8-week period, we delayed PPP until we reopened. The doctor and the staff move off of unemployment and onto payroll cost. The amount qualifies for 75%, and we have that forgiveness period all the way until July 20th. So, when we look at that scenario, when we look at those 4 options for this mid-size practice, what we see is option 1, it's a blend of unemployment. We're not having idle staff, we're bringing them back 4 weeks into the PPP term. So we get about $47,000 of benefit in unemployment. The forgiveness amount that we have for that PPP, based off of kind of gating it on that 75% payroll cost, calculated out to $51,000. So all in CARES Act benefit, we got a little bit shy of $98,000 in benefit. Now, same, in option 2, same time frame for receiving that PPP loan, but we move staff off of unemployment. We hit the 75%. We do see a decrease in our unemployment benefit that we captured here. It's only about $25,000, but we had just about $78,000 worth of forgiven PPP loan. So we see that go up a little bit, $103,000 in terms of benefit. In option 3, where we did not utilize the PPP, but unemployment all the way through to June 1st, well, we still used about $58,000 from the CARES Act in terms of leveraging that expanded unemployment. Now, when we get to option 4, where all that timing comes together, that's where we have that $57,000 in terms of unemployment that we were able to utilize. About $77,000, a little bit under $78,000 in terms of forgivable PPP expenses. And there we really maximized our utilization of the CARES Act and received about $135,000 worth of benefit to the practice over this time period. That's that mid-sized practice. Let's talk about that small practice. So again, exact same options, just a different census or a different demographic. We had 1 doctor, we had 1 hygienist, we had 1 assistant, and we had 1 front office person or floater. Wanted to really skim down the non-doctor element of this so that when we rerun those numbers under option 1, we did qualify for that 75%. And so what we saw was unemployment, again, starting April 27th, utilizing the PPP, we utilized about $15,700 of unemployment. We kept our staff members on for the first 4 weeks of that PPP forgiveness window, brought them back in for the last 4 weeks of that forgiveness, got full forgiveness, just a little bit under $32,000. And so for us there, almost about $48,000 worth of CARES Act benefit. In option 2, we brought our staff back immediately, but what you see is we did get an incremental increase in terms of the benefit that we have. Ultimately, that's because in modeling this, the doctor receives more from that $100,000 limit than they do from the max in terms of payroll or unemployment. That's where we saw that little bump up for that 4 extra weeks there. And so ultimately what we see is about $51,000. So here you can see option 1 and option 2 are very similar to each other. Now let's go back to that option 3, where we just stay on unemployment until June 1st, and then we're starting the practice back up again. We're not using any of the PPP dollars. What do we see? Well, we see a little bit shy of $26,000 in benefit just by the expansion of unemployment. Let's then again assume we come in with the next round of funding on that PPP side. That gives us the best of both worlds. In that case, we get that full almost $26,000 in unemployment benefits to help the practice save cash. We get a full 8 weeks of forgiven expense, and so that looks like option 2 on the PPP side of things, in terms of $39,600 being forgiven for that loan. Ultimately, we see about $65,500. So again, there's a benefit if they do continue to fund up PPP. The way that I think about this is, how much risk do you want to take? Similar to your investment portfolio. If we want to move with bird in hand, which was an analogy I used before, moving on those PPP dollars here in the near term, we're not going to get the highest benefit that we can out of the CARES Act. but we're going to get a known benefit, a known amount. We'll have that bird in hand. Utilize that 10-day waiting period, and it gets us closer to when it is we're going to open back up. When we think about the options, that 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we looked at the benefit, well, what's going to be the cost? Well, in option 1, we might not have a fully forgiven amount. We may need to hold off and hold our staff till June 30th to hit that full count. We don't know how that forgiveness calculation is going to work yet. When we get to option 2, where we brought back staff immediately, you might be paying for staff to be idle. And again, we might need to hold on to that staff until June 30th, and we don't know when the practice is going to be opening up again. Option 3, our risk is depleting cash reserves. We're not using that PPP in this scenario, but we risk no additional PPP funding. I mean, if that's part of the strategy and we missed it, okay, that's a risk. If we assume we're just going to use unemployment and not worry about the PPP, well, that's not necessarily a risk in option 3. Option 4, that is the risk, that you risk no additional PPP funding. So as you think about your practice, as you think about your staff, are you willing to accept the risk to get the greater benefit that's embedded in option 4 by waiting until when we're going to open? Or are you going to sleep better at night, knowing we've got bird in hand? Even though it might mean we're paying staff to be idle, we might not get that full 75% and that forgiveness. And so I wanted to give you just a couple of scenarios so that you could think about how that applies to your practice, what might be your numbers. This is not necessarily a fine art, but I'm hoping that these 2 examples really allow you to be able to anchor in on what your scenario might look like. Thank you very much. Hope this helped.